First, thanks to everyone for joining. As we mentioned earlier, we have a fairly global audience and panel, it looks like. So we want to welcome everyone. We want to, of course, thank Hacking HR for providing this online conference to more than 10,000 HR professionals around the world. So we'll go ahead and get started. So we are going to talk today about building the HR capabilities to thrive in the new world of work. We have Caskie Lewis-Clapper. We are waiting on Michael Keane. So we are looking forward to the discussion. So Caskie has over 30 years of experience helping individuals, teams, and organizations create capability and generate positive results. She began her career in human performance improvement research and consulting, and from there moved to M&A work in healthcare, gained experience in various HR leadership roles, eventually moving into her current role as a CHRO for Magellan. She's passionate about seizing opportunities to shape the future of work, is all about the team, and is a continuous learner. So thank you for joining us, Caskie.
My pleasure entirely, and hopefully Michael will find a way on as well, because trust me, it'll be way more fun if he can make it here. But as anyone who knows me knows, it's not hard for me to talk about this topic, and I'm so passionate about it. It's very easy for me just to take up all the space. So
well,
we'll
look forward to it
as soon as we can. Yeah.
So I did mention in the chat, so we want this to be as interactive as possible. We know that we can't hear everyone, but we're going to take full use of the chat functionality. We're going to really be diving into 4 themes that talk about the HR capabilities. All bets are off. HR is a change athlete. HR is a business unit. And finally, catch a wave. So if you have questions throughout, that you hear something that resonates with you that Caskie or Michael are speaking to, feel free to type your question in the chat, and we will answer accordingly throughout the entire discussion. So without further ado, I think we'll jump right into it with all bets are off. Okay.
Well, thanks to Anthony, he teed up the perfect sort of start for the all bets are off. And there are a few statements that my team will tell you I say all the time. This is one of them. We all have mental models in how we have learned our craft, and as practitioners, and as individual contributors, and as leaders, and as members of communities in organizations. One of the all bets are off premises is, if you think about the Industrial Revolution and how we started organizations, largely in the manufacturing arena initially, it was a very different type of premise, which was the leader knows best, called the shots, and basically kind of move things, forward in a Taylor sort of way. And at the crux of the all bets are off for me is that every single individual owns their own performance, owns their own success, owns their own failures, owns their own development, owns their own comfort with risk, and that there is no right or wrong answer. So I'm not going to apply judgment to an individual for what they are or aren't willing to do. I'm simply going to be very clear about what the purpose of the organization is, what the desired result is, and what we need to create high-performing teams to be able to deliver on that result. And individuals can, and indeed do, determine on a day-to-day basis whether or not they're going to contribute to that, if that makes any sense.
No, it does.
So that's kind of the premise of the all bets are off, which is, individuals drive their own performance and results. I think if you peel away at that, you get at things like talent management, right? Because it's about the right fit, given the goal at the right time, and moving and adapting and that sort of thing. So the person is in the center of the decision making. And from an HR perspective, all of our programs and our processes and our support systems are designed to help them make their own decisions. And so it necessarily means you got to say all bets are off on everything we've ever done in the last 20 years and ask the question, what do we want it to look like and how do we want to change it and how do we want to move it forward? Welcome, Michael.
Oh, Michael.
Oh, the pleasures of being a consultant, using your own computer and their systems and everything. It's a wonderful thing. I apologize deeply to the two of you and to anyone else who cares that I'm late.
No worries. Of course, you know, I dove right in because I have so much to say on the topic.
Well, I'm so happy you're my partner in this because I know I can trust you completely.
We're on the All Bets Are Off, and Anthony Swede, one of the attendees, actually put a comment in initially about individual ownership. And it is a premise of the all bets are off question. And to sort of break away from old molds and old ways of working things, wherein the premise was that leadership knew exactly what the right thing was at the right time for everyone. And to challenge that, it can be very freeing and it can be scary. And the other piece that I added to that, Michael, and then I'll ask for your thoughts on it, is not to assign judgment, good or bad, because someone decides something's not for them, or they decide they need to be in a situation where they need someone to call the shots, or they decide that they want to be in a situation where things are the way that they have been. So that was the all bets are off premise is you have to challenge every little thing about what we've created in the past. And I'll just give a very quick example on performance management. When we first started thinking through how we wanted to revisit performance management in this model, a team of incredibly intelligent people went off and came back with recommendations, but they still had the leader in the center driving everything. So we had spent time on it, we had all agreed to it, but the old mental models were so strong that we all missed that piece. So we learn how to learn in front of each other. We even say that. We say, okay, I'm learning in front of you on this, but let me challenge that. And really dig at what are the premises behind the decisions we make in creating programs, processes, and cultures.
No, great. And maybe before Michael jumps in, I'll welcome Michael to the panel, and I'll give a short introduction just so everybody in the audience knows who Michael is. So Michael is a leader of HR and operating teams for 25 years in businesses like Victoria's Secrets and PF Chang's. Michael is now an independent consultant and one of 3 partners leading the Sierra Institute, a peer-to-peer community of CHROs spanning the U.S. across multiple industries. As a consultant, he advises organizations and has been a featured speaker on change management, culture change, and organization design development. So with that, welcome and feel free to jump right in.
Thanks very much. I'm glad to be here. So when we say all bets are off, to me, the idea of living on the frontier is what is the metaphor that then the picture that comes to my mind. And if you think about it, you know, businesses have to live there these days. We're going to talk more about change as well as a very relevant piece of how businesses and organizations have to live. So we'll save that discussion for greater detail and depth in a few minutes. But if you think about how businesses have to evolve and have to drive change just so that they can not just survive but thrive, we in the organization have to help. As organizational leaders, we have to help them thrive and drive that change. And so if organizations and businesses have to live there to help take their customers and drive their organizations and their financial performance to higher levels, then how we have to think about leading those organizations as participants and organizers of the change, then we have to approach every day and how we think about things with how are we going to think differently? And we can't show up with a confined mental attitude. And so when Caskie and I were thinking about this conversation, this discussion, I thought it was very appropriate when she brought this up that we think and start this conversation with that mentality. So it's a very, very freeing mentality, because you can be frightened by it or you can be energized by it, I think is really kind of the way that we've thought about it. And I find it, actually, for the 30 years that I've been doing this, it's more fun than not. And so we've been really talking about this in a variety of ways in the function, going back to when I started doing this work in 1990. So this really is not a new way of thinking about things, but how we think about doing the work. The details shift. The headline isn't different, in my opinion, but the details underneath it shift, because the nature of how business is getting done is always shifting.
That's a great point. I think adaptability falls into that within the HR function. I mean, I think it's constantly ever changing, and we as HR professionals constantly have to adapt to those changes in the organizations.
We might use that word adaptability again before we're done here.
Yeah.
We might.
Yeah, sort of everyone has to do it, and we kind of have to go first. So
we should choose to go first, is the way I think about it too, right? To your point, Caskie, about having to go, I think the smart ones of us choose to go first. And I think that the work you've done in particular has been really, really in that vein, and it's actually benefited you as a leader, and it's actually benefited your organizations tremendously.
thanks, Michael. All right, so should we move on? Are we kind of triaging into HR as a change athlete?
I think we are.
Okay. So I'll.
So you want me to take the first shot at this one,
Sure,
since you had to carry the
sounds
burden
good.
on the last one?
Sure.
So I think that it really flows very naturally if all bets are off, and as I started to intimate in the last conversation there, if you think about why you own an HR function, you can think about all the transactions that bundle up typically under an HR organization, and all of those in this day and age can be outsourced. There's every single transactional piece of the HR function can be outsourced. So you have to, if you're really a value-added HR leader, you have to challenge yourself by saying, why would your organization continue to own an HR function, keep it inside, and make the investment to own that function on a personnel and non-personnel basis? Why not outsource the entire thing? And I would argue that there's two reasons why your organization would continue to do that. The first one is over time, you would own the HR function to perpetually help nurture and cultivate whatever the intended culture of the organization is, because clearly an outsourced group of service providers that effectuate the transactions of making payroll, administering benefits, and staffing the organization, just to pick three obvious ones, they cannot over time provide any sort of value-added support to help perpetuate your culture. And I don't think that's a hard argument to make. But the other one that I think is the gist of what we want to discuss right now, is that an owned HR function fundamentally can help the organization deal with the current wave of change that the organization's going through, and then prepare it and help prepare it for the next wave of coming change. And I think if you really assess your organization as it currently goes on today, and you look at it through that lens, and you say, what is the current wave of change with which we're dealing? And what is the next wave of change that we're going to have to deal with? You can probably get there fairly quickly. And I think that Caskie and I, as we take a look at the careers that we've led and that we are currently helping our organizations deal with, whether inside as she is or as an external consultant the life that I'm living, it's really not very hard to see that those are dominant themes that occupy most of our energy. And so, and they really are the most interesting stories that we would tell. So that is really, then you say, okay, what does that impact does that have for us as HR professionals. And so we came up with the idea that if you're really going to be a value-added HR function and an HR leader, you fundamentally have to be really, really accomplished as an HR change. You know, we chose the version of athlete as opposed to change agent. And so that's fundamentally what we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about. And so, Caskie, I'll let you take it from there.
Okay. I think that for me, and consistent with what Michael just said, HR as a change athlete is about a way of thinking, and always, to steal from Covey or quote Covey, begin with the end in mind. And we all have stories when something clicked for us, and I don't know if it was 6 or 7 years ago, I was at an org design forum conference, and we were doing open space. I'm sure many of you have experienced that. And the topic was blowing up HR. That was the card someone put on a chalkboard and they wanted to talk about. Well, of course, I wanted to talk about it. So I actually worked with a group of people from all over the world, all different ages, all different ethnicities. It was an incredibly cognitively diverse group of people, and there were maybe 25 of them. And on the spot, had to come up with, how are we going to talk about this topic? And so I said, everybody close your eyes. And I am an ex-athlete, and visualization as part of a strategy building opportunity is something I've always believed in. And so everybody close their eyes and we ask the question. It's 2030 and you are engaging in your work for the day. So I didn't say you're driving in. I didn't say anything other than you're starting to do your work. So I didn't impose any old mental models on what that meant, like a commute or whatever. And I said, what is it like in 2030 working? And we went through a visualization exercise. You know, how did you come to know about the work you're doing now? How did you get oriented? How was your time to productivity? What was that experience? How successful do you think you can be with the work that you have? Who's evaluating that work? Who's determining whether or not it's good? How are you being rewarded for the work that you do? How are you being assessed by team members? So I just threw out like a bunch of questions and I made them keep their eyes closed. And I said, I want you to picture it. And then we kind of threw it all up on a whiteboard, and what started to emerge were these clusters of what the future of work could be, without imposing many, because you know there were some, but many of sort of our old mental models. So from my perspective, and it was very, very different than what many people were experiencing on that day, right? And it was scary in some ways. And in some ways, it was like when I was in 5th grade and Mr. Gonzalez said, one day you're never going to carry cash. And I was like, no way, I'm always going to carry cash. And we looked at what we had created and what we thought the future of work could be. And then we couldn't get enough of it, right? And we kept thinking about, what is our role as HR practitioners? We have to go first. We have to be willing to try to envision it and to see what it can be, and to try to align it to the strategy of the business, because that's why we're there. And see where it takes us. So to me, this is the most important part of my role, which is as a change agent or a change athlete, and as a disruptor in a respectful and hopefully productive way. And I would have to say I probably have gotten more feedback about being an HR practitioner that's a disruptor more than anything, because I think people are shocked by it, which is sad. And I know that that's starting to change, mostly because of the people that are on this call. So we go first. we're change agents. We are not going to be perfect. It's going to get messed up sometimes, and we're going to learn from it, and we're going to get better and better. So that's the sort of change piece that's in my psyche for HR and as HR practitioners. And we try to live it every day, and we create issues with it as well. And Michael has heard stories about, us going first because we needed to, and the rest of the organization not being quite ready and trying to figure out how do we fill that gap. Because if you wait for everyone to be ready, we won't move. And that's not an option. So.
That's a great point.
So if I could take a couple shots, I think that was wonderful, Caskie. If I could take a couple of ways to capture and summarize what I heard Caskie say, and then blend in not examples, but just pieces that I've learned along the way as well. I think that to kind of put a bow on this part of our conversation, to be a really good change impactor and athlete, for us as HR practitioners, we've got to go first. We got to help people see what the change looks like, and then I think we've got to really learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, to steal from LeBron James, and really be all right living in the uncertainty and the ambiguity. And I got to tell you, that's kind of, to me, that's a point of separation for a lot of HR people in my past, and I've seen a boatload of HR people who are really, really comfortable with living in the clarity, and then they kind of lose it when it gets to be gray. And I think a lot of us on this call can think about those people in our past where we've watched the people who, man, when it's black and white, we're all good. But as soon as it starts to get fuzzy and gray, it gets really, they kind of shake. And you're going to have a hard time living as a change leader if gray scares the heck out of you. So it's all right to be around ambiguity, and you got to be able to lean into ambiguity if you want to be a change leader. And I think that that's what I've watched. And the older I get, the more comfortable I personally get with the ambiguity, because you don't always have to be right to be a change leader. I think that's the piece that I learned I have to give up. And you really don't have to be right to actually help your organization get better and live through the change. And I think that, and that allows you, once you throw that mental model out, then you learn that you can sort of take what you think are chances more frequently, and that maybe will help you get to being comfortable with being first, if that helps. So wonderful lead. Caskie, you want to take the lead on the HR as a business unit? I think you have some really clear thoughts about that.
Sure, I will. First,
maybe before you jumped in, just Anthony had a question just around seeing a trend where employee experience seems to be a hot topic for HR these days, and the strengths in empowering employees to take ownership. I think leading back to a little bit of what you were talking about is everybody's individually responsible. Just trying to see it. Oh, there we go. It keeps moving. The chat window keeps moving down from all the. But seeing the trend of employee transformation taking place, similar to the old rise of leadership development, but for individual employees, mobile adoption on the rise. So, what creative tools have you seen in terms of HR come across that they could adopt in that new environment?
Michael, I can take a shot at that. I think the employee experience has always been at the center, supposedly, right? But if you think about what I talked about at the beginning of the call, that individuals own their own choice, along with the accountability that they have comes the respect that they deserve in making their own choices. And so I'll give some, if I'm off base, whoever asked the question can tell me, but one of the examples that pops into my head is learning. And moving from, in the old days, we used to publish catalogs and put together learning tracks and, get people to come do this and then this and then this and then this. And now what we have are learning opportunities that you construct based on the great work that that we've done and my learning, I'm talking about my learning team, I'm just really excited about the work they've done to cull and carve and shape the right kinds of learning content and experiences to create capability in today's world, both as individual contributors and as leaders. And the learner has to direct their own learning. And the tools that they have are wonderful content and opportunities and, it's like walking into, we have, everything's automated, right? We have a welcome center. So it's one version of the truth for every single team member who joins our company, and they have access to the same kinds of information and content and opportunity, the way I see it, right? But if they don't ever go out to this and think about this, then they aren't doing any of it, right? So I'm not sitting around monitoring who's doing this, who's doing that. There's a few mandatory things for sure, right? And there are things that are part of programs that we ask people to do, but the net is they're driving their own development. And hopefully as a leader, we're spending time with our team saying, what's your focus? How can I help you? What hurdles can I remove? What can I give you access to? So it's, they choose every day our organization or not. The worst thing is when they don't choose our organization and they still come to work, right? So
that's a great point.
They choose every day. Someone told me this a long time ago. I've been married for 33 years, and we were told in one of our early weekends we had to do before we got married that, you choose every day to be in this relationship. And I've never forgotten it. And I think it's the same for people who choose to contribute to particular organizations. And what you don't want is folks who are coming in, but they aren't choosing to be there. So you got to create opportunities. You've got to create excitement and energy around things they have the ability to access and to drive, and make it easy for them to the experience point that was made in that question, and make it exciting and make it energetic. At the same time, they get to choose. So the employee experience piece, I think, has always been there, but I think it's even more magnified if you subscribe to the philosophy that, as from an HR perspective, they're a customer, and you're here to help create an environment that they truly want to be a part of and give their discretionary contribution to. I don't know if that helped.
I think those are. I think those are all wonderful points, and so I won't belabor by trying to prove that I'm smart, and I agree with them. I would only add one thing to what Caskie said, and I think there's an issue around self-awareness that HR tools can really help people with, and in my experience, people really do need a lot of help in becoming self-aware, and so in a number of the stops that I've had in my career, there's been huge benefits that have been really, really well received around providing that level of awareness for people through any number of tools. In my most recent stop at PF Chang's, we used the Strengths Finder, which a lot of people, some people have great belief in and appreciation for, and other people don't. So the tools are the tools, and they have their advocates and they have their detractors. But it was really well received in the Chang's environment. But the bottom line is anything that helps people become more aware of themselves, I have found helps their belief in their experience go up immeasurably. And then it leads into all the things that Caskie has talked about. Right.
No, great points. So let's move into HR as a business unit.
Okay. So I have been accountable for the HR function at Magellan since about 2001. I think I was 12 when I started, but the way that I see it, and my background was organization development, And so I was like an outsider to HR, if that makes any sense, in those days, right? I didn't grow up in HR. And little did I know I was about to do the most growing up I've ever done by owning the HR function. I look at it this way, and I have always seen it this way, and that is that HR within an organization, so obviously there's lots of different types of organization and different HR practitioners and ways in which you can contribute, but as an internal practitioner, HR is there to provide a service to our organization, including the board of directors, leaders, frontline team members, and everybody in between, right? And now we know it's also including customers and members because the ecosystem is incredibly porous, right? So I've done work for customers of my company, right? But the net is, if I can't provide best-in-class services fully aligned with our business strategy at efficient and effective processes and costs, then my company ought to go outside and buy that, right? Because there are thousands of disruptor companies out there providing great HR services. There just are. And that's the beauty of the world and of getting better and of things changing. And so when I invite someone to join my team, I invite them to join an HR company that's providing products and services to help our organization achieve its strategy and its results. So when I think about each of the different functions within HR, there's about 12 that we're accountable for. I want best-in-class thinkers who are willing to take risks and try different things. I want people that are okay to be held completely accountable. I want people who have the courage to deal with gauntlets that get thrown down that say things like, we're going to double in the number of FTEs our organization has, and we're not going to add FTEs to HR. What are we going to do with that? How do we create opportunity with that? How do we leverage technology differently? How do we consider the relationship between employee and employer and recontract? So those are just a couple of examples, but I believe that if we can't do it well, then our customers, which are our internal leaders, should go outside and buy it somewhere else. And I will tell you that I am proud to say that several times we've tried that on certain things that we say, maybe we outsource this, maybe we outsource that. And there are some things we do outsource, but the time I remember they wanted to outsource talent acquisition, the whole thing, and we did a pilot of it, and they 2 months in said, no way, you guys do it better, because they realized what we were doing for them. So I'll just make one more quick point and then ask Michael to comment on this, because I know he has great thoughts on it. And that is that when you think about it that way, it's very different than allowing yourself to fall into I'm in an overhead division of a business, which I think is just a death march. Like, that's just not the way that's not how I think. It's not how I think internal HR practitioners should approach their work and or allow the people they're working with to assign to them. It's a non-starter. This is hard work, and it's a competitive marketplace. And there's lots of companies out there doing it and doing it well. And I want to be one of those. So, Michael.
Great points.
Yeah, to me, it all starts with being just incredibly dispassionately objective about what you do and how you do it. And if you think about, Caskie spoke about it really clearly, I think, that you provide services. And so the first question I have is, are you part of an HR function that measures your services? Do you measure the efficiency of your services just like you were an outside business? So I think the easiest way to think about HR as a business unit inside an organization is, imagine if you had to sell your services back to your business. How would you do? How would you price your model? And how would you, first of all, explain the value of what you've done? And so how would you at first express the value of what you've done? And how would you express it through the quality metrics of what you've done? So how would you express the quality of your staffing services? And could you? I would say that every single HR team I ever joined, so I've joined I've inherited 4 different HR organizations, whether by virtue of promotion and or joining them from the outside. And there wasn't a single HR function that I inherited that was actively measuring their services, not one. So that was item number 1 on the agenda. So that was an organization that was not expected to, and or wasn't holding itself accountable to actively measuring the contribution that they were making to the organization. So that's a problem. So by definition, they were putting themselves into their own box. They were making it harder for themselves to get budget approvals. They couldn't ask for, they were making it very hard to ask for more money because they had put themselves into a position where they weren't speaking the language of the CFO, for lack of a better description. So if you want to go to the bank and ask for a loan, you better know how the bankers are going to evaluate your loan application.
Yeah.
If it's no more basic than that. So if you can't measure the quality of your services, that makes it really hard to get to the second phase, which is how do you talk about the impact of your programs? Because that's an even higher level of measurement. And so if you can do those 2 things, then you are well down the path of thinking of yourself as a business unit. Because the third part of the conversation of HR as a business unit is talking about your strategic contributions. But if you don't at least do the transactional components and be able to prove that you're effectively doing this transactional components of your job, I have yet to hear anybody that I've led care about what I think about the strategy of the business if I can't fill
That's
jobs. Right. If I'm walking around and people say, thank you very much, Michael, I don't really care what you think about our brand positioning because you can't fill my 3 director openings. No one cares about what you think about the higher level stuff if you're not getting the core components. If you can't make payroll happen error-free on time every 2 weeks, they don't give a rat's ass what you think about, whether or not we've got to open new doors in Bangladesh for whatever reason. Pick your topic. So part of being a business unit is having your core functions humming all the time, and being in control of your function and being in control of your job, and knowing and having all of your intradepartmental stuff working is a huge part of being a business unit. And then you can move on to the higher level functions within it. And I think that how you measure yourself and just being ruthlessly dispassionate about, do we have our act together, I think is at the core of being a business unit. And then you show that you respect the rest of the organization accordingly. And I got to tell you, the first time I was promoted to a vice president, I was hazed for a year because I was in retail. No one knew me. And I was a guy that was joining a very experienced retail team, and they were living off of 2 straight years of record performance. And I came from another division that was a really poor performer. And so they looked at me and I was younger than everyone else. And so they looked at me as this really inexperienced younger guy who didn't know retail. And they didn't care what I thought. They flat out, and they could have been more overt by walking up and saying, shut your mouth, don't talk to me, and I don't want to hear anything that comes out of your head because I frankly don't care. But they just didn't say it. So I had no choice but for the first 6 to 8 months to just shut my mouth and work totally on my team. And I was flat out told on the first day, the CEO, after they named me interim and then made me permanent, he brought my entire team into a room in front of me and took the wallpaper off the wall for 40 minutes by telling the entire team how much credibility the HR function didn't have. Because he said, you have a reputation for not getting your job done, basically not filling jobs and doing it credibly. And you live in gossip. you traffic and gossip. Those were the two headlines. And then he went on for another 39 minutes after he delivered those messages. So that was the team that I inherited. And so nobody at my peer level thought much of me as a person and a professional. And evidently the organization didn't think much of the team. So what did I do? I did exactly what I just spent a couple of minutes saying. And actually, after 7 months, it took the chief administrative officer to say, to let me in as on a side unrelated conversation. Well, all I know is that you guys are starting to get things done, and you personally, when you get involved in things, I know that something's positive is going to happen and is going to move forward. And that was the first time after 8 months that I thought actually we were getting something done. And that was the beginning of traction for the function. And so that's how you become relevant. Ironically, you become relevant by just doing your job.
And
That's a great point.
I think that's a great story, Michael, too. And I think all of us can think of situations where we had to really sort of dig out of actions of the past. I'd love to make one more quick comment on this if I could. And you guys have probably noticed Michael and I kind of bounce off each other. So he says stuff that makes me think of things, and it's wonderful, by the way. We took transparency to a whole new level organizationally in the last few years. And that means that my budget is completely available for my executives to see, to understand, and to have a say in. And one of the things we've been trying to really focus on is customization for business divisions, but leveraging strength from enterprise, right? So you got to have the efficiency and effectiveness. You want the best practices to sort of be the root of everything, but you're going to have different kinds of nuances. We have very diverse business lines, right? We've got a pharmacy business line and a behavioral health business line. We've got specialty population, we've got EAP programs. So it's very different. And I'm a huge fan of Peter Block. And I know that it was written a long time ago. It is a huge part of who I am as a practitioner, flawless consulting. If you haven't read it, you should, I think. And I contract with the executives of my organization on what services they want to provide and what services they're willing to pay for. And by example, I cut all consulting out of my budget. And when there's something that we need to do, it's come up out of a contracting conversation with them, and they pay for it, and they have skin in the game. And a great example I'll give for that is survey. We hadn't done probably 5 years ago, we hadn't done the survey for a couple of years because we had been using a very old model before that where you do it once a year and it takes 8 weeks to get the data back, and then everybody digs out and tries to come up with an action plan. And by the time they have an action plan done, it's time for another survey. You know, it's just crazy. I think it worked for a long time, but it was time for something different. So we basically said, let's do something different, like most companies, right? And created an argument with their executives for, we call it pulse survey, right? 3 times a year. Totally different approach. You have the day it closes. You pick one thing, but you just kind of track it over time. It's a pulse. They all anteed up to the bar and paid for it, and they still do. And they have skin in the game. They care about it. They pay attention to it. They are very focused on the cultures they're creating within their business units. I didn't force it down their throats. I didn't say you have to do this. I said, hey, here's something that will help you achieve the results you're looking for. What do you think? So it's not in my budget. They all pay for parts of it. And I think we're going to continue to do that because it just seems to work. They know what they're getting.
Right. No, that's a great point. And just as a time check, so we're just now at the top of the hour at 11, so we have about 15 minutes left. Thought we could close it out with our fun last theme of catch a wave. I know everyone is thinking, what is catch a wave?
Surf's up.
Do you want
Surf's up.
Surf's up? That's right. Caskie, you want me to start, or do you want to start?
Why don't you start?
Why do I start? Well, ironically, Catch a Wave is it sort of came out of and when we were planning this, it kind of came out of Caskie's mind, but I'm gonna love it. And ironically, I think we're gonna come back to the beginning with All Bets Are Off. So Catch a Wave is actually something that resonates with me in terms of a lot of coaching work that I've done. So the metaphor that works for me is it's staying on a surfboard. If you think about it, if for anybody who surfed, I've never surfed. I don't think I'd last 3 seconds on a board, but personally, but if you think about what's required to stay on a surfboard, you gotta absolutely stay centered. You gotta be grounded, and you don't know what's coming up out of the ocean, right? Because things are going to come at you. You can anticipate, even the best in the world. They anticipate, they see where it's coming, but everybody goes down, right? And so, but you get back up. And if you think about leadership in that capacity, in that context, rather, you need to be able to expect that you will go down. Nobody goes through life undefeated is a phrase that I love to use, and that's okay. It's reasonable to fail, and it's really great to recognize that failure is not final, and that but also what you need to expect, especially as leaders of large organizations or small organizations where people are counting on you to show them a way and to participate in the process of getting better, that the real skill is about adaptability. And as we think about being architects of organizations, if you will, if you think about being an HR leader in the future, especially, is you're architecting organizations and you're architecting cultures, and you're really helping the people who run organizations be great architects with you. Building the core skill of adaptability, some people are using the word resilience a lot these days. That's fantastic as well. Using the metaphor of staying alive on a surfboard, so catch a wave. Caskie and I just thought that was a really good way for us to end this conversation. Caskie,
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
I think you can take it further than I.
I'll just do just a very quick summary on that. I have taken surfing lessons. I have a son who wanted to take surfing lessons, so we all went and took them. And while I, being a HR nerd, while I'm doing it, I'm thinking about how it applies to business. And, sometimes it's smooth, sometimes there are waves. Sometimes the waves are manageable and you can ride them, and sometimes they're not. So knowing when to get off the surfboard and wait it out is really important too. And I think that when all the right things come together, when you see where the wave is, you're hitting it at just the right time, you're on your board, you stand up at just the right time, your core is strong, you're completely balanced, and then a breeze comes and you're just riding that wave. That's the feeling we're all going for in terms of aligning our strategies and our talent and our energies and our passions to get results. And it's the kind of feeling that if you have had the luxury of experiencing it at work on a team, it's the kind of thing that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, like, yes, we got it. And those moments are few and far between sometimes. Sometimes we go years without feeling them based on the work we're doing and maybe the teams that we're with and what's happening. And my whole career is about creating opportunity for those moments to happen. And then the other really nerdy thing I would say, and then I'll stop, is on the Catch a Wave. I think it's the Beach Boys who had a song, because I always say surf's up. That's kind of what pops in my head. My team and I say that to each other a lot, surf's up. Let's go see what we can do. But the next line in the Beach Boys song, because I know words to songs, which I can't monetize, or I would have by now, is catch a wave and you're sitting on top of the world. So I will leave you with that thought. And I think anytime we have now, we might just do Q&A, or I don't know.
No, that sounds great. Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes left. If anyone has any specific questions or things you'd like us to dive into, feel free to type it in the chat, and we'll be happy to jump right in.
Well, Brandon raised a question, I want to say maybe now 15 minutes ago, around, or maybe it's not a question anymore for him, because I know some people exchange comments about it while we're here, but it's around creating an environment where managers stop holding people back from going after development opportunities by saying no, you need to be back in the office, that kind of stuff. So I made a note of it. It looks like it was about 25 minutes ago that he raised the question. So I'll take a first shot at it, since I made the note, and I haven't thought a lot about it because we've been talking, but it's a fair question, and certainly I doubt Brandon's the only one experiencing that. So I think I think part of it goes back to the consulting piece, that the consulting contracting piece that Caskie made reference to, and I've had some success in that, with that approach in some parts of my life, Brandon, and where we've built in some logistical financial penalties, if you will, for the departments where people have had last minute cancellations, and so it hits their functional department budget for any last minute cancellations, so they experience some pain, and certainly as an HR leader, I've been more than willing to go out and press the issue, and I've never been a shrinking violet in my CHRO role around the benefits and the need for people's development. We make it an active part of engagement surveys as well, where this is one of the reasons I'm a huge believer in engagement surveys, because the way I look at it at culture is, your culture is what leaders do. And so the approach that I've always taken with engagement surveys is they are a way of giving the organization a chance to hold leaders accountable for what they actually do. And so engagement surveys that include very specific questions about whether or not the people in the organization have active development plans and have been actively being developed. Those are two of the questions. I'm being very inarticulate with the actual questions themselves, but you basically ask the questions that saying, I've actually have a written development plan, and another question that comes off like, I have participated in some form of external development, stuff like that. So you use those kinds of things, whether you do it through a pulse survey mechanism like Caskie mentioned, and or you do it through a formal process like I've used, where every department and all people get a chance to do that. When managers know that they have that kind of accountability exercise going on that gets down to a department level, and then you have somebody who has my title or Caskie's title walking around and actively advocating, and then you have a combination of financial penalties so that last minute cancellations are going to come back and hit their budget anyhow. I have found that over time, that kind of combination of activities tends to at least lessen the probability that the kinds of, oh, you have an emergency meeting, or I can't let you go this week, gets minimized. It certainly never gets removed entirely, but it gets minimized. And the people who are perpetually just not in favor of promoting people and or helping them develop, those people get called out in the talent development process, because those people also are holding people back from, they just don't become talent exporters in general. And that becomes a far bigger conversation that gets flushed out through the talent evaluation and talent development process, if not the performance management process. That's my experience.
No, that's a great point. We did have another question talking around change athlete, and I know we've got about 6 minutes. So in your all's experience, what do you think the biggest challenge or barrier to transition into change athletes? And that comes from Charlie.
You mean as individuals? Do you mean? I'm just trying to.
As individuals, when we talked about, HR has to go first. They have to be, this change athlete. And I think the question is, and Charlie, feel free to chime in if we're not hitting the mark, but what do you see as the biggest challenge for HR practitioners today to make that transition? Because it is a bit of a, a change that's happened probably over the last several years of moving in this direction.
So I'll just start very quickly with a couple thoughts, Michael. The example I'm going to use is Workday. We moved to Workday, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And prior to that, I had this amazing team in the systems area that did great work, and they did it the way that they did it. When you go from a technology system that houses information to a human capital management capability, it's a whole different set of everything. And we learned as we went, and we got very clear about asking the question on a regular basis, is this something you feel that you want to and are able to do? And I made it not threatening for someone to say, I'd like to do it the old way. And then we worked through that. And the other thing that we did was we said, there are going to be some folks, and there were, they just wanted to use pen and paper and make, their calculations and then input it in the system, right? Because they've done that for 30 years and it works great. And it did for them, right? And I said, if this is not something that makes sense for you, that is okay. And there are plenty of organizations out there that are in a different marketplace and are able to say, go ahead and use your pen and paper. We're not one of them. And I will give you a transition opportunity that will allow you time to take a breath and to actually find an organization that is more suitable to where you are and what you want to be doing. And it does not make you a bad person, and it does not make you less than. It actually strengthens you in my eyes because you're being very candid about who you are and what you want and what you're able to contribute. So
that's such a great point.
We had a lot of transition, but it wasn't negative. And I don't think it has to be. It's an old mental model that you're disloyal for leaving a company because it's not going in the direction you want it to go. I say
that's so true.
Or calling it out. Because there's no
way. And I think what we underestimate.
Perfect fit for everyone all the time. That's just the way life is. So that's
you're right.
My comment on that. It's just being open to having people think out loud with you about what's best for them and have them not be threatened by that.
No, that's right. And I think the surprising thing is, in my experience, is when you have that conversation, normally you can just see the weight be released on that other person to have the opportunity for it to be okay. Michael, we've got maybe 1 minute to wrap it up, and then I'll close this out.
Well, I'll take 30 seconds, and Caskie, you can finalize. The only thing, thank you for your participation, and I love the questions and the dialogue. My guess is we could probably go another 30 to 45 minutes with what I'm reading on the side. So thank you very much. I've enjoyed this. The last thing I would say is, when we've talked a lot about change and everything else, and where I'm working with clients too, a lot of times in organizations, and you're probably getting this in your organization, people somehow expect that the current wave of change they're going through is somehow going to lead to some moment of rest, or it's going to be the last one. And what I find myself saying to leaders in organizations, you need to start saying to your teams, don't expect any of this to ease up or change or slow down. And I think that's, if you're not already doing that with your organizations and your clients, I would encourage you to start. The second thing I would say to you is love the Flawless Consulting book by Peter Block. Another one I would throw out there, if you're not already aware of it, is The Trusted Advisor. It's a wonderful book, I think, that has served me well, and I've recommended it to all the teams that I work with. It's in a very similar vein. It has a slightly different angle in some ways. It's not written for HR people. It's written by consultants, but it's completely applicable to the HR work and the kind of stuff that we're doing.
That's
Thank you,
great.
Mike, for helping me and Caskie through this experience. And always, Caskie, enjoy working with you.
No, thank you to you both, and of course, thank you for everyone who joined. And hopefully, you pulled some nuggets out of the conversation. And hope everybody has a great rest of the week and a great weekend.
And can we